Hey y'all, hope you're doing well today. So in today's message, we're going to be reviewing chapter 2 from this book, Fire in the Soul, by Joan, I hope I'm saying her last name right, Borisenko. But it's a wonderful book, and I flipped through different parts of it. I think I've already touched on a little excerpt from chapter 3, so we'll probably skip that one and go on to chapter 4 after today's video. But the first chapter, just to review, was centered around why do bad things happen, which I feel like we've all pondered that question at one or more points in our life, right? And then chapter 2 is called The Search for Meaning, and it opens with that quote that I've already shared with you all from Viktor Frankl. And so yes, the search for meaning, which goes right hand in hand with the first chapter. And then what's interesting is chapter 3 is titled Crisis as Initiation. And as we go through chapter 2, talking about the search for meaning, we'll kind of see how that ties into the theme of chapter 3 as well. And then chapter 4 is called What If? Reframing Basic Beliefs. And then it goes into a part 2. So, just looking ahead a little bit there. I feel like we might say what we're going to talk about today might be considered a repellent that we can just embody and live in and live through boldly, just through our everyday lives. And a repellent, specifically with regards to people who lie. People of the lie, you might say. I think there's even a book called that or something. I've heard that somewhere. People who just who minimize and dismiss the importance of truth, and who feel like it's just natural I guess it is for them to literally live every moment of their life enmeshed in deception, which is a totally foreign concept for a lot of us, right? And so, but we know that this is intentional for a lot of reasons when someone is living this way. But, when you're, what's the word I want to say? You're the kind of person that gives people the benefit of the doubt, like to a fault. When you're that kind of person, you wind up making excuses for people. It's like early on when you're just getting to know somebody, sometimes you'll catch inconsistencies. Their actions are out of alignment with their words, for example, or just a tiny little spark of something that that for sure is not true, but it's just so minuscule you kind of overlook it. But that's just the thing, because you think, well, I don't live that way. I'm transparent. I'm a transparent person, which is a big part of our theme today. I'm an honest person. I value that. But when there's this tiny little something, especially if you're seeing that in a lot of people you meet, it's kind of like you start to think, well, I'm not going to change who I am because I have this conviction in my soul. I have this code of ethics written on my heart that this is the way I'm going to be. I'm not going to change that. But yet you see it sometimes repeatedly out there as you meet people, and you start to think, is this just kind of the way of the world, in that I'm never gonna meet someone that's in total alignment with my value system? It's kind of like you start to question everything and everyone. And so what happens, I feel like, is like an automatic unconscious coping mechanism kicks in, and we overlook these things. And it's not something that I think we really even realize that we're doing. That's what I mean when I say it's automatic and unconscious. It's just sort of we all have this need to belong. It's an innate instinct that we all have to want to be a part of a community, a tribe of people, right? For survival. Again, it's like an instinct. And so I think because of that, we do overlook a lot of things sometimes. And we don't realize that in the process of doing that, we're actually placing ourselves in a position of vulnerability and risk. Because that is an indication of sometimes much bigger issues and problems. So, yeah. So, but when you go through some things and you are gifted, you might say, with a broader perspective on things, at that point you are willing to go it alone. Go it alone. At that point, you are willing to override this script you have inside of you to want to belong, instinctually, to a group, a tribe. You're willing to just override that and overwrite that script within you, because you realize, even though that's written for safety, in the real world, you're actually more safe sometimes, depending on who you're surrounded by, going it alone, or mostly alone. So just something to think about. But we're going to talk today about a correlation between completely authentic interactions and love. Not romantic love, but more of like the godly type love. I think it's called agape, right? The godly type love that God has for us and that we have for Him, and that we can share with one another in that same spirit, right? So there's a connection there between truth and love. Okay, so let's talk about it. All right, so I'm going to read over some quotes out of chapter 2, and I'm going to summarize and paraphrase and give you my thoughts. Okay. Okay, so she opens chapter 2 again. It's called The Search for Meaning, talking about one of her son's friends had passed away in a tragic accident, and she bonded with his mother, she says, through the tragedy. And then she quotes this. She says, I was reflecting on what one of them had pointed out, right, and talking with all of the shared friends amongst the boys, right? She says, I was reflecting on what one of them had pointed out, that it was too bad tragedy had to strike for people to slow down and show their real selves to one another. And if you think about it, it's kind of like, again, everything's on a spectrum. It's not like, honest people, your normal everyday honest people that value truth and integrity and honesty. It's not like those kind of people go around intentionally masked up, living behind a mask. But in looking at this spectrum of transparency, you might say, there's a level of reservation that we all have, which feels like, again, preserving or safeguarding your pearls. It feels like a good approach to life, right? And so what can happen is, I feel like we get caught up in this mode of operation where we're just kind of, we're only meeting one another in a certain level of what feels appropriate with regards to societal expectations. It's like a level of being polite. And in doing so, you're not being deceptive, and you're not necessarily not being transparent, but you're just being reserved. And you're being reserved, though, to such a degree that it's kind of inhibiting this deeper connection that would serve everyone well. You see what I'm saying? That's how I see that. So she goes on to talk about the family of the young man that had passed away. They had compiled a book about his life, and they had all contributed to it. And she was wondering what they were going to come up with as the title. And so she says, I was wondering if he, meaning the boy's father, would give the book a title. And he had. And it addressed the question of why bad things happen very simply. The title was Love is the Answer. And she goes on to explain how that seems like a radical statement, that may appear simplistic, or a wishful cover-up for grief and all this stuff, magical thinking, out of touch with reality. She goes on to explain that. And so she goes on to expand about people who have had near-death experiences, and she basically says it is science that is out of touch with a larger reality, where love is indeed the very fabric of existence, right? Okay, so then she goes into a section she calls Whispers of Eternity, Evidence for a Larger Reality. And this is really interesting. She says, as a medical psychologist, I have heard dozens of stories that defy conventional scientific and psychological theory. And then she goes on to talk about some patients and clients and their stories, which is really interesting. And how one of them, his experience when he started to share with his therapist, it was dismissed as magical thinking, right? Okay. And then she says, and she expands on that, the general public is currently far more accepting of these experiences than my psychological and scientific colleagues are. And then she goes on to talk about the non-local mind, that concept. And she says, visionary experiences. She's talking about that. And she shares where one woman who had gone through, I guess, a near-death experience and had met with some guides, beings that she felt like were her guides. She came back and reported, she says, the being of light explained that life on earth, precisely because of the suffering, is the finest opportunity to learn about love. Okay. And then the next section is called Beliefs That Limit the Ability to Grow from Crisis. And she goes into talking about the difference between being responsible to what happened to you versus being responsible for what happened to you, and how it's just the subtlety there that makes all the difference. And when we, in our life experience, when we come out of a challenging time. And so she says, in my experience, those people who are able to find a meaning in their illness or tragedy focus on being responsible to the situation by using it as an occasion to attain greater freedom and happiness, rather than seeking theological knowledge about why bad things happen, right? Because what can happen is, when we're trying to figure out why we just went through what we went through, we try to, and I think rightfully so, it's in good, with good intention, we try to say, what was our part in this? Did we possibly contribute to this? Did we cause this in some way? That's normal, I think. But that's the approach of being responsible for, something. And then instead of that, she's offering the opportunity to us to look at it through the lens of being responsible to it. Like, what can I learn from this? How can I alchemize this in my life into something greater, for a greater purpose, and so it's a really great chapter. There's a lot to it. It's very rich. Over on, if you have the book, on page 47, she says, tragedy, however, she talks about things being psychologically threatening for people, like certain discussions, theological discussions, and how people are at different stages with regards to their perception of reality, I guess you might say. And she says, because some things are too psychologically threatening, right? She says, tragedy, however, can break through literalism, and painful though it is, lead to a healing of the wounds of childhood that can in turn inform an expanded faith. I love that she used the term expanded, because that's how it feels. I've talked about it in my previous videos, that there's this expansiveness. You gain this elevated view of things, not like egoic elevation, like you're now royalty, you're a king or queen or anything like that, but it's a bird's eye view. It's where you're no longer focused in, on this little piece of the larger puzzle, a micro type focus. You're now on the macro. You're now elevated in that manner. You have these eyes to see, as the Bible says, right? It's expansion, really, of awareness. And she says, when crisis strikes, whether it's cancer or an arrest for drunk driving, we are called to be responsible to the tragedy. In the process, our beliefs may change quite radically. Yes, and I wrote breaking free of unconscious strongholds. Absolutely. I love this next part. This is really interesting. She's talking about, she calls this part exiting the cave of old beliefs. And she's talking about Charles Darwin's landing in Micronesia. And she talks about the natives there and how they had no concept of what a large ship was, because all they had ever seen was just small boats. And literally, she says, when the Beagle, which is what they called their large vessel, when the Beagle was pointed out to them, right, they literally could not see it. It was invisible to minds that believed such a big ship to be impossible. Again, we have just an exemplary point made in this real life example, right, of how important belief is. Belief is so crucial. And if you have limiting beliefs, you are literally cut off from a deeper understanding. And that deeper understanding is what can, or the expanded perspective, however you want to say it, all of this is what can heal you. It can bring you healing. Again, the Bible says wisdom is the principal thing, and with all you're getting, get understanding. And so it's for a purpose, it's for a reason, right? I thought that was really a cool example. And then she goes into talking about her background. She mentions Plato's cave dwellers, you know, in relation. And then she wraps up this chapter by saying this. This is really cool. We're going to talk more. But she says, we drop like pebbles into the ponds of each other's souls, and the orbit of our ripples continues to expand, intersecting with countless others. For in order for our suffering to have any meaning at all, it must ultimately increase the capacity of all humankind both to love and to be loved. So you might say she's proposing the answer to that question. Why do bad things happen? The answer might be to increase our capacity to love and to be loved, right? And I relate this to, I'm reminded first of all of Bob Marley's song, you know, could you be loved? And then it says, you know, and could you be loved and be loved? It's like, what is he really saying there? Sometimes I think he's saying, could you be loved and be love? Can you be love? Can you exemplify love? You know, both, because it's like a reciprocal relationship, this agape love that we have, you know, with God. It's almost like the Bible says nothing can come between the love of God, right? And us, and I would say except for ourselves. You know, it's kind of like we have to have that doorway open in our heart. We have to not restrict that flow, that energetic flow, you know, of divine energy, right? Which is love, the motivating force that animates all and makes everything possible. And so, yeah. And so, yes, I really enjoy this chapter a lot. And I read the whole thing, but I just wanted to just hit on a few points. Again, we'll probably skip chapter 3, and then next time we'll go into chapter 4, what if? Reframing basic beliefs, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit from that point. She early on in the chapter was talking about how one of that young man's friends had made this statement, and it was resonating with her, that it's sad that it takes a tragedy for us to, how did she put it? To just be totally open with each other, you know, to be real with each other, I think was what she said specifically. To show, for people to slow down and show their, excuse me, their real selves to one another. Yeah. So, I think there's this close relation between truth and love. So one of the strangest things that I feel we've normalized is that being straightforward and to the point, or you might say blunt, with one another, it's kind of, it's been sort of demonized, in society. And so there's this expectation in our subjective reality of, behaving a certain way, being a certain way. And look, we all expect it. We all expect a certain level of respect, in our interactions with one another. But it's kind of like, it's not that. It's the fact that can be exploited. And we're going to expand on that. So, think about this. Again, I mentioned recently about extremes being shown, like in the news, and how that kind of directs our focus to this black and white type thinking. When the overt atmosphere is one of extremes. But reality is more in the gray area, right? People are afraid to be straightforward and openly honest and blunt, right? Because on the spectrum of any given topic, when your statement is made, it's kind of like it's automatically logged into this system of extremes. And it's kind of like, let me share this with you all. So my daughter and I are playing Mario Wonder, this video game. And we finally figured out how to make it 2 players, which is cool. But it's so confusing. When I'm trying to watch my character on the screen and hers is going 2, I just, I can't even, I don't know why, but I can't focus on mine. So I've gone back to, can we please just make it 1 player and you can pass it off to me when you need help. So I like that better. But it's a cool game. It really is. Mario Wonder. And there's this one, I don't know what you call it, like activity that you come across as you're playing the game in different stages or whatnot, different mini games within the greater game. And your character can jump on this little road or path, and it's just like zooming, and you don't have to do anything. You don't have to run. As soon as you zoom on it, or you jump on it rather, it zooms you across. Or it might be running vertical, and so you jump on this wall and it zooms you up, or it zooms you down, or whatever. It's really cool. That's kind of the mechanism, or the dynamic that I'm talking about, when in this society of extremes of black and white thinking, like you just innocently, you truly try your best to approach life in the manner of trying to see all angles. And when you just make a statement sometimes, depending on the climate of the group you're speaking in, it can get just totally amplified one way or the other on the spectrum. It's meant to fall in the gray area and accommodate for all different perspectives, but it just gets zoomed over here or over there, right? And that creates this fear sometimes of people wanting to share anything at all. And what does that do? That cuts us off from fully transparent interactions, see? And that cuts us off, I feel like, from experiencing this agape love with one another in society. It cuts us off from that. And so that's kind of a big deal to me. It's kind of like when the natives that were blind to the ship that we talked about, the big ship, we are sometimes blind to gray areas of life, or to a bird's eye view, right? Where we can see many angles. So whenever we are covertly restricted through the subtle programming of constrictions, we are cut off from being able to connect with each other through our truths laid bare. Okay? So I would say this: enmeshed and narcissistic type family dynamics, they often create this restrictive environment. And controlling spouses do this too. It's kind of like they're expecting you to pretend that it's normal to avoid, the elephant in the room. Okay? So when you're conditioned to conform to these paradigms where being polite or being kind is actually twisted and exploited, then you learn to tolerate to a fault. You learn to overlook to a fault. It's just another avenue for a wolf in sheep's clothing to cut your connection with reality, which is why when you share these kind of things with a therapist, like especially for the first time, it shocks you when it shocks them because you've normalized these things, right? And it's not your fault. You were made to, you were conditioned and influenced and persuaded to normalize these things. Okay, so this has a likeness to what Sam Vaknin calls the shared fantasy, right? It's mind manipulation, especially when you're talking about a psychopath. So the irony of this process is that because there is a direct correlation between truth and love, the further we are lulled into this fantasy or this mind fog, you might say, the more we are cut off from truth, and some part of us and deep inside knows it. And because we have been cut off from truth and transparency, any love that we have for someone doing this to us, it starts to dissolve. This is to me, you might say, the spiritual division of the wheat and tares. Okay? And so we realize that what we thought was love at this point, or at some point, we realized that we thought it was love, and really it was a trauma bond masquerading as love. Or, you know, what you might call Stockholm Syndrome. So then what happens is that we wake up to the truth that we were cut off from. And when we do that, it's painful. It's very painful, because we are finally facing things that we just really never wanted to face. And we suffer. We have to feel it. It's that whole saying, you have to feel it to heal it. And you do, you suffer through it, right? You're in that valley. And so this is the stage that you might describe as the veil has been removed, right? You've come out of this mind fog, the fantasy, the spell has been broken, all of that stuff. And so we're essentially like face to face, it feels like, with evil. You know, I'm not talking about a person, I'm just talking about the experience, you know, of what happened. It feels that way. So at this point, we're in a position, and sometimes we're quickly catapulted even into this position of understanding real love. Now we've been gifted with perspective, you know, like for real. And we start to understand real love, or God's love, right? And therefore, the right kind of love that we should all have for each other. And we can see the difference in a trauma bond that is through the dynamic of manipulation versus love, which is through the dynamic of transparency. See? So, when this happens, it only amplifies and solidifies our conviction about what we went through. That's my experience. And again, I'm just reminded of Romans, I think it's chapter 8, where it says God works all things for the good of those who love him, right? He's always working behind the scenes, right? So as we come into this godly agape love, the awareness of, we come into the understanding of what and who is true and what and who is not. Which reminds me, so my family used to have chickens, and they had like a turkey. His name was Bubba. And he would dance around and you know, do his feathers like this, you know, be real showy. And it reminded me of, you know, in nature sometimes it's the male, like the male birds that are the most colorful, and I'm thinking of peacocks and how they shake their tail feathers, and the females are more just kind of plain, you might say, you know. So the males are showy in nature a lot of times. And I'm thinking about in history, you know, there was a period, I don't know when it was, but not too long ago, when men used to wear wigs, you know, really fancy wigs, and I think maybe even makeup. I'm not sure on that, but especially the wigs. And it's just really, it's a lot to think about. And then now in modern culture, you know, it's the women that are more, you might say, made up, you know, with our hair and makeup and our clothes and things like that. So, but anyway, that's kind of a little tangent there. But you reach a point of what I would call X-ray vision. It's like spiritual X-ray vision. It's not like you know it all, but you just see things so different now. It's like you're not fazed by the external. You're just not. It truly does become for you all about the heart. And it may have always been about that, but you just didn't have the wisdom back then that you do now. And that's what gives you that clarity. Understanding is a critical piece of the puzzle. So it's like you just can't get into superficial conversations anymore. If someone seems robotic or empty or off balance energetically, you just don't, you can't waste your time. You just can't do it. And of course, nobody's perfect, but you're able to find, if you are able to find just even 5 people in your, you know, especially like in your local area. I mean, anyway at all, even if they're not local, or whether they are or not, but it's even more rare if they're local. But if you can just find 5 people that you resonate with because they value transparency as much as you, that's incredible. It kind of feels so rare. It's kind of like they're unicorns. They're so rare. It's so rare nowadays. That's my experience anyway. And so, yes. So we might think of think about this. We might consider what they call truth as subjective. Because one person can absolutely believe these particular points to be truth, hard facts. And you might see it different and be totally convicted about it, you know, through your different stance. So it's not about necessarily agreeing on that per se. It's to me, it's more about valuing transparency, right? Because when a person values transparency, they're going to value your perception of truth, even just because of the fact that you're willing to share it. It's valuing transparency, right? So especially if you can explain it, if you can explain your stance on something, you know, that makes a big difference too. When your perception of truth is not just totally based on emotions and feelings, when it's founded on, you know, direct experience or like fervent research, you know, that matters. But essentially transparency becomes the new gold standard, you might say, in connections, right? So if you think of our values as magnets, if you're sporting transparency and someone else is sporting something else that has historically been deemed, you know, a good thing, like having gumption in life or drive, being motivated, their charisma, being polite and all that, right? If that's their primary value, that's their main magnet they're operating with, and your main magnet is transparency, it's kind of like when you go back and you look at this, you know, different connections you've attempted in your life or whatever, it's kind of like, why would you ever expect something like that to work? Because the primary value, to me, it needs to be active honesty, or what I call transparency, active honesty, right? Because love without truth isn't love. You might even say truth is love in action. So how do you know what's true about someone? I would say, from my life experience, you have to literally be strong enough to observe totally unbiased, totally without emotions hinged on the outcome. You have to truly be what's the word I want to say? Just neutral. You have to be the observer, which is a big philosophy concept. you can't let your peace and this is where you can get into concepts like codependency. Like, you can't literally allow your peace to be contingent upon someone being a certain way. You have to be strong enough to see them for who they really are, period. That's what will protect you, you know? And you have to truly have faith and trust that your people will find you and that you will find them, you know? So this approach as a lifestyle is like weaving God's armor. Wearing God's armor. That makes a lot more sense. I can't read my writing, y'all. Yes, if you literally approach interacting with people, meeting new people, and all this in this manner, like as part of your lifestyle every day, that's how you wear. If you really want to simplify it, I see that as that's wearing God's armor. That's exemplifying what that means, you know, just being so rooted and grounded in truth that comes first. And that means more to you than connecting with someone. What's more important? Connecting with someone, you know, and being willing to overlook, see? And the thing is, a lot of times the lesson is that it is a big deal when you overlook things, because when you're not experienced enough in life, and you may think it's okay to overlook some things and it's not going to result in anything bad, but life teaches you that it's kind of like that whole concept where there's smoke, there's fire. See, it's it's not something to play with. So because you don't know to what extreme this person is just deeply rooted in deception. And for what motive? I mean, it can't be for a good reason, you know? And so it's just a lot to think about. And as always, it's my goal to get the wheels turning for you. And I hope I did. I hope I maybe helped you to bring some puzzle pieces together. I hope I was encouraging and inspiring. I just want you to know that you're never alone, that you can be your own proof of what is out there in the world. You know, if you are truly walking in the spirit of wanting to learn and grow and put your best foot forward, and you're an honest person, a transparent person, authentic in that manner, then just authentic in all manners, really, then just know you can't be the only person in the world that way, right? Even if it seems that way in any given point in your life, if that's, you know, not the kind of people you're surrounded by or with. So just be encouraged and know that you were never alone. And that's where belief, remember, belief is a critical what do I want to say, catalyst, in that it truly can mean the difference in having the eyes to see or not. And that even means having the eyes to see your people or your tribe. So I hope this has been encouraging, inspiring, and again, I hope it got the wheels turning. I thank you so much for coming along to hear the message. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.